Welcome to Verba English. Learn and enjoy.
1. Introduction. How countries interact is called international relations. It involves leaders meeting, making agreements, and helping each other. Sometimes these relationships are simple, and other times they are more complex. This book looks at the relationship between two countries, the United States of America and El Salvador. It tells a story about how they worked together during a specific time. The leader of the United States at this time was President Donald Trump. He was the 47th president during his second administration. The leader of El Salvador was President Nayib Bukele. These two presidents met and talked about important issues. Their countries started to work together more closely during this period. A big topic for both countries was immigration. Immigration means people moving from one country to live in another country. The United States government wanted more control over its borders. President Trump's government had specific ideas about managing who entered and stayed in the country. They looked for help from other countries in the region, like El Salvador. El Salvador agreed to help the United States with its plans for immigration. Another important topic was security. This means keeping people safe from crime and danger. Both presidents talked about problems with crime. President Bukele also spoke about crime problems in his own country, El Salvador. Working with the United States was seen as a way to help manage security issues. This included dealing with gangs, which were a concern for both nations. They discussed ways to deal with people they thought were dangerous. President Trump and President Bukele met at the White House in the United States. They discussed how El Salvador could help the U.S. El Salvador became an important partner for the United States on immigration matters. Part of their cooperation involved sending people from the United States back to El Salvador. This included people accused of being in gangs or committing other crimes. El Salvador agreed to take hundreds of these people. This book will explore this special relationship. It will look at the agreements made between the two governments. It will describe the actions they took together, especially about immigration and security. We will learn more about the meetings between the presidents. We will also learn about the plans for sending people back to El Salvador and what happened next. The book will present the information about these events clearly. It aims to explain what happened during this time of cooperation between the United States and El Salvador. We will look at the different parts of their partnership. 2. Meeting the presidents. President Donald Trump met President Nayib Bukele. The meeting happened at the White House. The White House is the official home and office of the American president in Washington, D.C. This meeting was very important for both countries, the United States and El Salvador. It showed the beginning of a new working relationship between the two leaders. President Trump was the 47th president of the United States. President Bukele was the leader of El Salvador, a country in Central America. During their meeting, the two presidents discussed important subjects. A main topic was immigration. Many people travel from Central America towards the United States. Managing this movement of people was a big concern for President Trump's government. They talked about ways the two countries could work together on this issue. Security was another key subject. Both leaders spoke about problems with crime. President Trump mentioned there were dangerous people inside the United States. He also noted that El Salvador faced its own problems with crime and gangs, sometimes called terrorism, and needed help. A significant result of the meeting was El Salvador agreeing to become a key partner. President Bukele promised that his country would help the United States with its immigration plans. This cooperation was important for the American government's goals. President Trump publicly thanked President Bukele for his country's support and cooperation. He was happy El Salvador would work with the United States. Part of this new partnership involved El Salvador accepting people sent back from the United States. This process is called deportation. The United States government wanted to deport people it believed were dangerous. This included hundreds of people suspected of being members of criminal gangs. President Trump specifically thanked President Bukele for taking these individuals. Records showed that since March, El Salvador had already accepted over 200 people deported from the U.S. These people were often accused of gang activity or other serious crimes. President Bukele mentioned that to control crime, it was sometimes necessary to imprison people. This first meeting set the stage for future actions and agreements between the two countries. It started a period of close work on immigration control and security matters. 3. Working together on borders. After the presidents met, the United States and El Salvador started working together more closely. Their main focus was on immigration and border control. The two countries made agreements to help manage the movement of people. Migration, which means people moving from one country to another, was a big topic for both governments. El Salvador became an important partner for the United States in its plans for immigration. President Bukele agreed that his country would help the U.S. A key part of this help was El Salvador's agreement to accept people sent back from the United States. These were people that the U.S. government did not want in their country. This cooperation meant that El Salvador took back its own citizens who were in the U.S. without permission. But it also included people from other countries sometimes. For example, El Salvador accepted immigrants from Venezuela who were in the United States. Since March of one year, El Salvador took in more than 200 Venezuelan people from the U.S. The U.S. government said these people were involved in gangs or other crimes. The United States government said it wanted to remove dangerous people. President Trump thanked President Bukele for taking hundreds of people the U.S. believed were gang members. This was seen as helping with crime problems. These agreements showed how the two countries decided to cooperate on border security. El Salvador played a role in the region by working with the U.S. on these immigration issues. This partnership involved El Salvador helping the U.S. control who crossed its borders and who stayed in the country. Working together on borders became a central piece of the relationship between the two administrations. They shared information and worked on plans to control migration in the area. 4. Sending people back. The United States government started sending certain people back to El Salvador. This action is called deportation. It was part of the cooperation between the U.S. and El Salvador on immigration matters. The U.S. administration wanted to remove people it believed were dangerous from the country. Many of the people sent back were individuals the U.S. government suspected of being gang members. President Trump mentioned that there were many people in the United States who, he believed, should not be there. He stated that removing them was important for the country's safety. The plan involved identifying these individuals in the U.S. and then transporting them to El Salvador. El Salvador, under President Bukele, agreed to accept these people. This agreement was a key part of the working relationship between the two presidents. President Trump thanked President Bukele for helping with this. El Salvador showed it was ready to receive the deported individuals. Hundreds of people were sent from the U.S. to El Salvador as part of this policy. For example, in the months following March, reports stated that El Salvador accepted more than 200 individuals from the U.S. who were accused of being involved in gangs or other crimes. The process required coordination between the two governments. The U.S. identified the people to be deported, and El Salvador prepared for their arrival. This policy of sending people back mainly focused on those the U.S. government considered criminals or members of gangs. It was a significant part of the immigration actions taken by the U.S. government at the time, with El Salvador playing an important role by accepting the deportees. This cooperation showed the close links between the two countries on border and security issues. The deportations affected many people and were a visible result of the agreements made between the leaders. 5. A big prison in El Salvador. When people were sent back from the United States, they arrived in El Salvador. El Salvador agreed to take these people. This was part of the plan between the two countries. But where did these people go after they arrived? Many of them were sent to prison. El Salvador used special prisons for people sent back from the United States. Some of these prisons were very big and had very high security. President Bukele agreed with this plan. He said that El Salvador needed to deal with crime. President Bukele said that putting some people in prison was necessary to keep the country safe. The United States sent many people back to El Salvador. The U.S. government said many of these people were members of gangs. They said these people were dangerous. Hundreds of people the government thought were gang members were sent from the U.S. to El Salvador. El Salvador took these people. It was not just people from El Salvador. El Salvador also took in people from other countries who were sent from the U.S. For example, starting in March, more than 200 people from Venezuela were sent from the U.S. to El Salvador. The U.S. said these people were involved in gangs or other crimes. These people were also put in prisons in El Salvador. President Bukele built a very large new prison in El Salvador. This prison became well known because it was so big. It could hold thousands of people. It was built to hold people the government thought were gang members. When people were deported from the United States because the U.S. said they were in gangs, many were sent to this type of prison. Life inside these prisons was very hard. President Bukele wanted to stop gang crime in his country. He used these prisons as part of his plan. Working together with the United States helped him fill these prisons. The U.S. helped find people they believed were gang members. Then, El Salvador took them and put them in prison. This way of working together meant that people called dangerous were taken off the streets in the U.S. and put into prisons in El Salvador. President Trump thanked President Bukele for doing this. Taking these people helped the U.S. with its plans about immigration. It also fit President Bukele's plan to be strong against crime in El Salvador. So El Salvador became a place where people sent back from the U.S., especially those called criminals or gang members, were put into large prisons. 6. Hard cases and problems. Working together sometimes brings challenges. The plans between the United States and El Salvador also faced some hard situations and problems. These problems showed that the system was not always simple and sometimes made mistakes. One big problem was the case of a man named Kilmer Abrigo Garcia. He lived in Maryland in the United States, but he was sent away to El Salvador by mistake. He ended up in a prison with very high security there. This caused a lot of trouble. The government in the United States said it made a mistake with the paperwork. They called it an office mistake. But they also said it was not their job to bring Mr. Garcia back home. They said a court only told them to help him return. They believed it was up to El Salvador to send him back. President Bukele of El Salvador asked how he could send Mr. Garcia back. He asked if he should secretly bring him into the United States. He said he would not do that. This disagreement made things difficult for Mr. Garcia. His family worked very hard to bring him home. They asked the government to fix the mistake. People held signs saying, "Bring Kilmer home." A judge in the United States also looked at the case. The judge wanted to know if the government was following the court's orders correctly. This case made people ask questions about the deportation process. Some people were worried because individuals were sent to El Salvador because the government said they were gang members. But sometimes, courts did not check carefully if this information was true before these people were deported. This worried some experts and lawyers. They felt it was very important for everyone to have their case looked at fairly. They believed that following the correct legal steps was needed for everyone. These kinds of difficult cases showed the problems that could happen with these policies. They raised serious questions about fairness and the rules that needed to be followed when people were sent from one country to another, especially when mistakes happened. 7. Talking about U.S. citizens. A new discussion started about who could be sent away from the United States. Usually, deportation involves people who are not citizens. But now, there was talk about sending some United States citizens to other countries too. President Trump spoke about this idea. He discussed it during a meeting with President Bukele of El Salvador at the White House. President Bukele had already agreed that El Salvador would take people deported from the U.S. These people were often put into a large prison in El Salvador. President Trump talked about criminals inside the United States. He used the name homegrown criminals. He gave examples like people who push others in front of trains or people who attack old women. He described these criminals as absolute monsters. President Trump said he wanted to find a way to send these U.S. citizens away, perhaps to El Salvador. Someone from the White House, the press secretary, gave more information. She said the president was thinking about U.S. citizens who had done very bad and violent crimes. She added that this could only happen if there's a legal pathway to do that. It was not fully clear if this idea was for all citizens or only for people who became citizens later in life. called naturalized citizens. In some special cases, naturalized citizens can lose their citizenship. For example, if they did not tell the truth when they asked for it. The government did not explain exactly who they were talking about or how it might work. President Trump mentioned that the Attorney General, the country's main lawyer, was looking at the law. He said she was studying the law about this subject. But the government offices did not give more details about this plan when people asked for information. Many people who study law had strong opinions about this idea. These legal experts said that deporting U.S. citizens is illegal. They explained that it goes against the country's most important set of rules, the Constitution. One law professor stated it was clearly illegal. Another lawyer who works for a group supporting immigrants explained the reason clearly. She noted that the immigration laws allowing the government to deport people are written only for non-citizens. These laws cannot be used against people who are citizens of the United States. This conversation about deporting citizens came up while there were already concerns about other deportations. The U.S. was sending people, including some accused of being gang members, to El Salvador. Questions were raised about whether these people had enough legal protection and court checks before being sent away. Thinking about sending citizens away made these worries about legal rights even bigger for some people. 8. Looking at the results. The United States and El Salvador worked together closely on immigration. This cooperation had several important results. Let's look at what happened because of their agreements and actions. One big result was that many people were sent from the United States back to El Salvador. This included hundreds of people who the U.S. government said were members of gangs or had committed crimes. El Salvador agreed to accept these people. This helped the United States with its plan to control immigration and remove people it believed were dangerous from the country. The number of people being deported to El Salvador was an important part of this cooperation. The plan also aimed to affect security. By sending suspected criminals and gang members away, the U.S. government felt it was making the country safer. For El Salvador, receiving these people was part of President Bukele's own plans. His government had strong ideas about dealing with crime. Many of the people sent back from the U.S. were put into prisons in El Salvador. This cooperation was seen by both presidents as a way to deal with crime problems. These actions had a large impact on the lives of many people. Individuals who were deported faced big changes. Their families were often affected too. Sometimes there were difficult situations and problems. We learned about cases where mistakes may have happened, causing great difficulty for the person sent back and their family who tried to help them. Even when the process went as planned, deportation separated families and created new challenges for those returned to El Salvador. Questions were asked about how fair these processes were. Some people worried if everyone's rights were protected when they were identified and deported quickly. These concerns were part of the discussion about the results of the cooperation. In summary, the partnership between the U.S. and El Salvador led to clear actions on immigration and security. Many people were deported to El Salvador, which helped meet goals set by both governments. President Trump thanked President Bukele for his country's help. However, the results also included serious challenges and difficult outcomes for the individuals and families involved in the deportation process. The cooperation changed many lives,